right. We'll call, is it on? Can you hear me? All right, we'll call the meeting to order. I'm Nancy Gardner.
Kimberly Carter.
Sorry, and we are, hopefully our third member will be here shortly. Public comments on non-agenda items. Now, I think we have a very busy schedule tonight. I think there are going to be a lot of discussions and questions. So I'd ask you, let's observe the 3-minute requirement for any of the comments tonight if you can. So are there any public comments on non-agenda items? Oh, wow. That's a first, okay. And I have a motion to approve the minutes.
Seconded.
With the corrections. I think Mr. Mosier submitted those, and so we thank you for those. All right. Now, all right, an update on the schedule.
Good evening, Chair Gardner and Committee Member Carter. I'm just going to provide you a very brief update on the scheduling updates for the housing element and circulation element, and we'll do that with a couple slides. So the first slide here is our anticipated schedule, which was actually shared at our last steering committee meeting on July 11th. You'll notice that the Planning Commission meeting for the circulation element recommendation did move into September, so that's now September 8th, with eventual council adoption anticipated for October 11th, 2022. On the housing element timeline, the red dot was added to show that our intention is to submit revised pages to HCD. HCD's review was so limited this time around, they were able to provide us mid-review feedback, and we were able to provide revisions to address those comments. So we've posted those actually today on the city's website, newportbeachca.gov/draft-HE update. You can view the pages there. And again, the city's intention is to submit those on August 16th for HCD's review, hopefully for incorporation and consideration in their August 26th letter. Our goal is that they will provide us indication that we are statutorily compliant and that we just need to adopt the element, which is why we've got September 13th still targeted there for council readoption. And I'm going to let Jim take this slide.
Well, actually, that concludes our discussion of the first item on the agenda, item B, just to give you an update. So there really is no action on item B. The slide up here is for the next item. Actually, it really is a precursor to the next two, and I'm happy to move on if there's any other questions about the schedule.
I'll just see if there's any questions or comments from the public. Please come up and identify yourself, if you will.
David Tanner, Newport Beach resident. I'd like clarification on why there is no relationship between the housing element and CEQA. Why is not the CEQA document being prepared and certified prior to the city council action, because it's listed as an approval on the housing element? To me, as a CEQA practitioner for 47 years, it seems fundamental, and it seems fundamental from CEQA that you can't piecemeal a project. So I'd like clarification. Thank you.
All right. Sam?
Certainly. When we took the housing element to the City Council in February of this year, we recommended the council find it exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. And the council did take that action. And so we anticipate that it would still be exempt. This is really a planning document. This actually doesn't approve any projects. It's a simple policy document. So it really does not have any, it leads to any impact to the environment. Now, that being said, we have the land use element. We do need to modify the land use element. We're going to discuss that here in a moment. And with that will be an EIR for all the housing that would otherwise be in the housing element. So we feel that the recommendation to the City Council going forward will be that it would be exempt.
All right. Yes, you may.
Just so we're on this topic, it's acknowledged in the documents you're going to review tonight that the housing element, land use element, and other elements are linked. So the piecemealing was not addressed by staff, and if this is a draft approval by the city council of the housing element or the housing element project, that's okay. But if it's a final approval, it cannot be done by state law without first the city council approving a CEQA document, and that changes the schedule dramatically. So for me, to go forward, if this is a steering committee, I would ask you to steer staff, steer the council into making the approval of the housing element, whatever they want to term it, a draft approval, which does not require a CEQA document. They could be making it without any indication of what the environmental consequences are of the goals and policies that are in the element if they want. I wouldn't if I was a city councilman, but they could be doing that. So I would say if they're going to approve something, approve a draft in order to get HCD approval, then include it in the bigger picture, the bigger project, which you're going to do the CEQA document for. You've already acknowledged that. Staff has acknowledged. Thank you.
Thank you. Any response?
So it was our original intent to complete the environmental, but you need a stable project description to do the EIR. We're up against deadlines, hard deadlines to submit the housing element to HCD. We found exemptions because it is a planning document. Mr. Tanner's confusing projects. You can't develop anything off this housing element. We still have to do all the other elements. So hence, we didn't finish the EIR. We're going to get certified. We're going to do the land use element. We're going to get the EIR done, and that's what we're going to do.
All right, thank you. All right. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Chair Gardner and members of the committee. My name is Jim Mosier, and I wanted to comment on the circulation element plan. As I indicated in writing, I, at least as a member of the public, have lost track of why we are steering the circulation element completion on a separate track ahead of all the other elements that you are going to be steering with your steering committee. Number one, I do not know why we're doing that. Number two, from a very quick review of that document, as I indicated in writing, it does not appear to me that it's been very carefully studied by the public, because it looks like in adopting it, we will be adopting a new master plan of streets and highways, which is a diagram of the circulation elements, the roads and highways that we need to accommodate the growth from the RENA. And that diagram is not even posted with the circulation element, so the public at this point doesn't know whether staff is proposing changes to that or not. And that if changes are needed, I don't think the public has discussed where those changes are needed. So it doesn't seem ready for adoption now, and I don't know why it needs to be adopted before any of the other elements. There might be some legal reason, but I'm not aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, staff, the rationale?
Certainly, Chair Gardner. We started the general plan update and kind of focused to housing and circulation. So we went through and prepared the housing element. We also went through in working with the community through a series of workshops to update the circulation element, the policies of the circulation element, not the master plan. And so it's complete. It went through its process. It was over a year ago. We recognize that. The hope is to get that done now. There's no reason to not get it done. It would make our circulation element more in compliance with state law that was adopted many, many years ago to include complete streets policies. And so we want to get that accomplished so that those policies are there for us to guide any projects that might come forward within the circulation of the community. Why do it now, and let's do the EIR first to see what the impacts are. What that's suggesting is that there might be some impacts that needs to change our master plan, which is the highways and the intersections. And we don't know if we need to change it. And so we want to wait till the EIR is completed then in order to take a look to, if there are any deficiencies in our circulation system, and then evaluate that with that information when the EIR is done.
And that will be when the master plan is.
And that will be, and I'll talk about that here momentarily with the next agenda item. It actually is the next agenda item.
Okay. As we get into number C, we have the revised scope of work. Could you start with, because in looking through both agreements, there seems a lot of interlap, and I wasn't sure. I mean, Kimberly Horn is doing some outreach, it seems like, and whoever we get will be doing some of the general plan. So how do you see that working, and what is the actual distinction between the two groups?
Sure. I think what we'll end up doing is just starting the discussion on the next agenda item, and I can answer the question as we
Okay.
go forward. And so the next slide here is really kind of to help kind of put a little context around the two agenda items that you see, D and E. I'm sorry, C and D.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, a little background. We do have Kimberly Horn under contract to do the general plan update. You know, before we got too far along, RENA happened, and we basically retooled that process to focus on the housing and circulation elements. And so that was kind of a mid-course scope of work change that we did with Kimberly Horn. They're under contract to do the EIR as well, and they prepared a lot of the EIR, but they didn't finish it. You know, again, we got sidetracked with housing. And so we want to maintain that contractual relationship with Kimberly Horn, because if we were to go back out to bid, you know, I probably won't have a contractor on board for 2 to 3 months, and we can't afford those 2 to 3 months given the timelines that we have. Just as a point of reference, the housing element, what we've told the HCD is that we'd get this to a vote of the electorate in March of 2024. In order to do that, we need to do the EIR and do the land use element update, and that's what's really going before the voters, is the land use element update, the increases in intensity and density that we might be putting into the land. And so that's kind of a quick timeline to maintain that contractual relationship with Kimberly Horn, but we need to, again, modify that scope of work, and that's the item that you see, item number C. So right now, they're under contract to do the whole general plan update. You know, we've done the housing element, we've done the circulation, and now we want to focus in on the land use element and the zoning that's required. In essence, we're implementing the housing element.
So, again, so when I just looked at it initially, I said, okay, this is the technical people, Kimberly Horn, and the other group that we're going to do a new contract for, an RFP, is the outreach group. But that's not actually quite it. So
No.
Kimberly Horn is going to focus mostly on just the land use element and the zoning. Is that their role? And then the other group is going to be much more focused on the general plan?
Yes.
As a whole?
Yes, as a
Okay.
whole. So if we go forward with Kimberly Horn to do land use and zoning, you know, we're in essence implementing the housing element policies.
Right.
That's really the goal here. But the rest of the general plan, we're going to do that on a parallel track at the same time. We're going to do all the other elements. And so that will involve a bit more outreach to the community, a little more dialogue. I mean, we've got to deal with safety element and climate change and updating the recreation element and a whole variety of other elements that we need to work on so that we have, you know, internal consistency among all the elements. And so that's the second scope of work that you see there. So
So-
that hopefully gives you the context within which
Yeah,
these two
but
items
for
are
example,
done.
task 3.1 is public meetings and community outreach.
So that is really for the land use element and the zoning overlays.
Okay.
And that's where the EIR would be done. And so, you know, basically because of the schedule and the need to finalize that project description for that EIR, we need to start working on it pretty much immediately.
Right.
And hence why we want to continue our relationship with Kimberly Horn, to obviously modify the scope. Obviously, we'll have to go back and look at the contract, make sure there's enough funds in the contract to pay for the work that we need, and if there needs to be an amendment, go to council, we can do that. That's part of the administration that we'll handle. But we want to get them going. Now, the outreach that you see here is a bit more limited. And there's a reason why, is that, you know, if we stop work now and we go through a very large, you know, effort with the community to try to figure out what it all should say, well, at the end of the day, it has to implement the housing element. One of the things you'll notice in the scope is we included, you know, a market analysis to see if we need additional commercial development to help support the growth of the community. Do we need a shopping center here? Do we need additional? When you look at the housing element, you'll notice a lot of it is done with the elimination of office buildings in the airport area. Well, these people need to have jobs too, so where are they going to go get their jobs? And so we want to make sure we do a market assessment to figure out, do we need additional commercial entitlement intensity to support the growing community? So those will actually be our goals for the land use element. And so, and given the schedule, we really don't have the time to go back to the community and
No,
have
I'm
a
not,
ground up.
I'm not concerned about that.
effort.
I just want to be sure I have clear in my mind the different responsibilities. So Kimberly Horn will also then be coming to GPAC meetings.
Yes.
Bringing them up to date on and getting their reaction, so that there is that, the committee will have a chance to also have input.
Yes, let me explain. What we'd like to do is to modify the contract and then turn Kimberly Horn loose, get that market study done, get the, examine all the policies of the land use element and the noise element so that we can implement the housing element. Figure out how much commercial and where it might go, and then craft policies related to that. And so by the time we get the General Plan Advisory Committee seated, we'll actually have a draft document. I need to go that fast in order to hit the schedule that we've identified to the State Department of Housing and Community Development. So that's the reason why we can't do some big ground-up kind of outreach effort to determine what all this is. We really need to turn the consultants loose to get the job done so that when the
I was
committee is
just trying to
seated,
get-
we've got a draft.
Want to be sure that you help me understand the distinction. All right, what I propose that we do, you're going to take us through, but that we will also focus, I would assume, on the deliverables. And we'll look at each group, and you and I can ask questions, and then each time we'll ask if there are questions from the public, and we'll do it. Instead of making you wait until the end, going back everything, we'll just do each one as we go along.
Certainly, certainly. Well, first thing I want to indicate, if I may, is that this is a draft document. Kimberly Horn, the project manager, Dave Barquist, was on vacation last week, so unfortunately we didn't have a chance to have him provide some input on this. So this is a very rough draft, if you will, of what all needs to happen. And so we'll have to work with him, and I'm looking forward to hearing any comments from the community and the committee on the content of this. But the basic description is in task 3. Public meetings and outreach, again, we're going to get this done, and then we're going to bring it to the GPAC, and then we're going to have a discussion and debate about the first draft. And so that's what task 3 is really dealing with.
What's the deliverable?
The deliverables here on number 3 are the preparation of a detailed summary and presentation of all the proposed draft elements as agenda items, so up to 7 public meetings. So the thought there would be, that would be possibly 1 meeting in every council district if we chose to go that route. It could be virtual meetings, in-person meetings, but it also, on number 2, it's the preparation of that detailed summary and presentation to GPAC and the steering committee as directed. And so it's a little vague. We don't know exactly how many meetings we're going to have, but that's going to help us understand the full scope of the changes that need to be made.
Is the intention that there'll be the presentation to GPAC and GPUC, and that's separate from the public meetings, the other meetings, or are that all combined?
Those will all be public meetings.
Oh, I know they'll all be public, but I mean, we talk about 7 public
It's
meetings.
all combined.
So there'd be 7 total, including GPAC.
And that's our staff's number. We start out with 7. If you recommend something higher, then we can definitely do that, or at a cost basis too. Yes, it's all inclusive.
In these, do you usually have a specific number?
We want them to bid something out, so we always start with a number versus leaving it like, tell us how much per meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is something that is time sensitive.
Yes,
Yeah, so that's, in other words, we're not doing the 2-year things where we have meetings down the road.
correct.
Okay. Any thoughts about the number of meetings?
To be honest, no, I'm going to defer to staff on that, and we'll figure it out as we go.
Public comments?
Thank you. I'd like to say my opinion, and I think our city has a fine group of consultants. Kimberly Horn is an outstanding consulting firm, well qualified to help the city achieve the goals for an updated housing element. I believe that Kimberly Horn should be, and this committee should recognize that they would be the consulting project manager, and if the city wants to bring in additional consultants, or Kimberly Horn says we need additional consultants to complete other elements and other tasks, that's okay. But as far as Kimberly Horn goes, they should be the project manager for the consultants, reporting to the city staff who give Kimberly Horn direction and interface with them. So if the RFP is going out, these people are going to do more than public outreach, as you point out, and I pointed out in my comments to you. They're going to be updating other general plan amendments, and to be fair to the public, this is a draft, as they have hastily prepared a draft that's intentionally vague and ambiguous. This needs to be cleared up for the city to get a reasonable proposal. Otherwise, you're going to get some lowball number, and that's going to be 10 times higher by the time the city has figured out what they're actually going to do, which the city doesn't know at this time, which is why when it's written, it's intentionally vague, because they don't have the project description now. They're still trying to work it out with HCD. And if the housing element were merely policies and goals, like most housing elements have been for years, I would agree with the city that it would be exempt from CEQA. But in this case, it has the RENA number associated with the housing element. The RENA number links it to the land use element, and that triggers state law, which says it is not exempt. And HCD, and you need to know this because you're going to be steering them, has written a letter to the city reminding the city of the state law. So if the city says, no, we're not doing this, that's one issue, but they're fighting with HCD, and they need approval from HCD, and there's a loggerhead here between Newport Beach and a whole bunch of other cities that are in the same boat as Newport Beach. So there's this battle going on, and you as a steering committee need to get us, the public, to the finish line. And the finish line is a vote of approval from the public, or all of this is a waste of time and money. Thank you.
Thank you. You will then, in the next days, after we make all our wonderful additions, talk to Kimberly Horn and come back. Does this go to council or you just sign it?
So the amendment to the scope of work will go to council.
Right.
So we have to amend their
So
contract.
you will have something much more specific when it goes to council, and you'll feel more comfortable after having a discussion with them in terms of particularly, say, the number of meetings and that sort of thing.
That's correct.
Okay. Anybody else?
My question is, on the CEQA issue, are we taking the lead from other cities, or are we, I mean, we're really comfortable with the determination that this is strictly a policy document?
For the housing element, yes. We are very comfortable. We have legal counsel that opined on it. We know other cities have done the same thing. Just everybody's out of time,
Right.
right? So that's why we went down that road, and I think we're solid there.
Okay.
Jim, did you have something?
Yes, thank you again, Chair Gardner. Item C, the title on the agenda says we're discussing a revised scope of work for the Kimley Horn and Associates. What little we have of a staff report is several pages that it says are replacing task 3 that is in the current scope of work. It was not clear to me, and it's still not clear, if this new task 3 is their entire new scope of work, or if the other tasks are remaining. If the other tasks are remaining, it would seem useful for me, for the steering committee to know and be told and review what the status of those other tasks are, so that you as a steering committee know where Kimley Horn currently is in the job that was presented to them. There's nothing here about that, so perhaps some of those other tasks need revision as well. Perhaps some of them have been completed. Perhaps some of them being taken on by the other consultant. I really don't know. And forgive my confusion, but I think we just heard somewhere in this new scope of work, they're going to be reviewing traffic and traffic improvements, and I find that very confusing. If in the previous agenda item, we just heard the circulation element is going to be completed and approved before they even look at those things, which I would think would be an essential element of the circulation element. So it seems a very scrambled up and confused plan. And it's not, perhaps this time being driven by the housing element is changing things, but it's not the cohesive general plan update in any way, as far as I can tell, that you were involved in between 2000 and 2006, where you comprehensively look at everything and try to get a plan that all works together. This seems to be just kind of a patchwork of things to add on to a housing element that is primarily been written not by the people, but by the staff and HCD. And I think that's unfortunate. Thank you.
I agree, and I think everybody's had that issue with the RENA thing, that all of a sudden that became the tail wagging the dog, and we are not going to be able to approach everything on an equal basis the way we did the first time. That's just the reality of it. But to get back to the first point, is this totally replacing the former
Well,
number three?
it's not replacing all of the items. We're going through and looking at it here. All the other tasks are necessary, and some of them have been complete. Like task 8, I think, is the housing element certification process, so obviously that remains. Task 9 of the original contract is the EIR, and you'll notice that in the very bottom under task 3.9. I mean, we put this in this format here to basically summarize the changes to the documents, changes to the work scope that would be, I guess better articulated in a more complete document that interfaces with the existing contract. But we wanted to just put it here as a summary for everyone, so it's all in one place. But those other tasks are going to remain, but the task 3 is almost completely revised.
As revised, all right. So we move on to 3.2.
All right, 3.2 is, okay, the review and changes to the general plan and land use element itself. And so it is a review of all the policies in the general plan to affect right now you see these study areas, the airport area, West Newport Mesa, Dover Westcliff, Newport Center, and Cody Canyon. These are the focus areas of the general plan where the housing units went. And so we were tasking the consultant with a review of those policies for those areas, and then obviously crafting changes to those policies to affect what the housing element is requiring us to do.
Okay,
So
how does that work out with the general plan process, the whole general plan process? I mean, it's bumping into something, it seems like, because you're going to have these policy changes, and does that have anything to do with the advisory committee, or is that just?
Well, the advisory committee is going to be commenting on the policy changes.
Okay, they will be.
Yes,
All right.
so that's going to be our basic forum within which the community will discuss and participate, provide comments and feedback on the proposed changes.
Right.
So think of changing the land use element, and then also later on you'll notice the noise element as well. Where's the noise element? That's task 3.6. Think of those two elements being modified to be consistent with the housing element. That is really the task in front of us. That is what the land use element update truly is. However, there's a big caveat there. You'll notice in here that market and fiscal analysis, again, to potentially identify additional non-residential development to support the growth of the community. That's another aspect of this that's not yet well known or well studied, how much that would be. But just kind of in a high level kind of review or thought, we're updating the land use element to make sure that we're implementing the housing element. That's the primary function of what this element will be doing, or what this amendment will be doing.
But there will be comments, there will be input.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
In looking at the deliverables, I have the same question that Mr. Mosier did on number 2. What is the special component?
Special component.
The recommendation shall include a special component. That's about as vague as you can get.
It is special, yes. I think that's just an incomplete thought, so we'll
Okay,
scratch
all right.
that unless there's something.
All right. It's like, okay, is that a song, a dance, maybe?
Well, I can speculate with what I was thinking when I was drafting this, and part of this is to do that, and it's described a little bit later here. Again, is to evaluate the real estate market, evaluate the community's needs will be for this growth that we're planning for. Do we need a neighborhood shopping center here? Do we need other non-residential components elsewhere? So there's a spatial component to this. And we don't know where we might need that shopping center, but the airport area, we've received a lot of feedback that the airport area needs some additional maybe a shopping center.
Is, when you get to number 6, specific policy guidance for up to 5 distinct areas, are those the areas that we have, the housing element is focusing on in terms of the housing, or are they just 5 areas that we may select and say, these are special? Santa Ana Heights is, unique or something?
Well, those particular areas are the focus areas that are within the housing element, so we're
Listed
keeping,
already. All right.
yes. And actually, just back to the special component, that word is actually supposed to be spatial.
Oh, okay.
And it's a fancy word saying, we may want recommendations as to where to put what non-residential. Do we need something in Newport Center? Do we need something in West Newport? We recognize West Newport is kind of an evolving, changing area. And one of the items that we're talking about is, modifying the existing zoning that's underlying to allow for additional uses to help support, that would support the additional housing that's there. And so that's kind of that spatial component. Although we are special, all these areas are
Very
special.
special, spatial
The word is
component.
spatial.
Number 5, up to 2 draft and 2 final. I usually think of there's a draft, there are drafts many drafts, and then there's a final. Is this just the thought that the final would be presented to council, and if council had further revisions, there would be a final, or?
At times, there are changes at the city council, and that would be incorporated within the final draft.
So that would be
And
part of the responsibility.
when a consultant bids on this, they recognize even at the last hearing, the council might make a change, and so, that's all incorporated with the fees.
Okay. Kimberly, any
Not yet, no.
comments from?
I might as well. In terms of the process, I think that's really important because the city faces liability from CEQA challenges, and they're trying to get the goal is to get HCD approval first. Without HCD approval, it's irrelevant whether the city council approves something. Without city council approval, it can't go to the public for a vote. So we have a strategy. Here, I, just a layperson with 47 years experience in preparing CEQA documents and processing development permits, thousands of projects for multiple jurisdictions within the state, am saying this isn't going to work. So we have a disagreement amongst experts. Why don't you, as a steering committee, suggest to the city council that they go perhaps to the state attorney general and say, here's what we want to do. Is this going to be okay? That sounds like it would be very clear guidance. If the city council, if the state attorney general said no, well, they're going to be on the same board, then the same plane as HCD that has said no. And technically, theoretically, it's only policies and goals until RENA came in, and RENA is not part of the land use element, it's part of the housing element, and that's what changes and invalidates the theory that the city is using. So go to the state and
All right,
say, here,
well,
this is what we want to do.
I think that
Prove us, then we'll know we won't get sued.
All right, thank you. That the staff and the council feel that they have the legal opinions that we are on the right track.
Well, what I would say is that we feel comfortable with the strategy to get the housing element certified by the state. We need to incorporate all those housing units into our land use element, and we will do an EIR to satisfy the California Environmental Quality Act with the adoption by the council. They will set that for a public vote in March of 2024. And we feel comfortable with this strategy from a CEQA compliance standpoint.
Right, and the council has heard some of these concerns?
Yeah, I believe they have, yes.
All right.
And we have had legal counsel input and also environmental consultant input from Kimberly Horn, who's going to be preparing the EIR. So, we feel comfortable with the strategy that we're embarking upon.
All right. 3.3, update to land use designation descriptions. That sounds boring.
This is fun stuff. It's not boring, but this is basically the task, although it's not necessarily very detailed, but the option is to, the goal is to implement that housing element, all those increases in density in those different geographic areas, but as well as any non-residential to support that. So again, this is part of modifying the land use element descriptions, or policies to implement the goals, to get the housing element in there. So it's a fairly straightforward task, but it's part of drafting the amendments themselves.
Comment? Okay. Market and fiscal analysis.
So this task here, a lot of this came out of the original RFP that went out with the land use element, with the general plan update. But what we're really looking for here is we're looking for an assessment, a market assessment, to make sure, that we're making some recommendations to increase the commercial or non-residential intensity in the community, just help support the growth of the community, as I've indicated. So we want to have a market analysis to kind of show, okay, well, we really kind of need this, or we kind of need that, and it might be located here or there in order to help support the growth. That'll give us kind of a basis of, a frame of reference, if you will, to make some policy decisions about how much commercial might we add to the general plan for that reason. Now, obviously, we'll be talking to property owners and other stakeholders in the community, and through the general plan updated advisory committee process, we'll get feedback from the community. Obviously all that local knowledge is very, very important as we go forward, but this will give us at least some objective examination of what those needs might be, and then we can make policy decisions from there. And the committee, General Plan Advisory Committee, will make those recommendations to council. We also want to take a look at the fiscal analysis. Residential land uses, it's our experience that residential land uses are definitely something a little more expensive and costly to the city to support than commercial. And the reason is, commercial land uses will generate taxes, which then help offset the costs of police and fire and utilities and parks and all those things. But we want to try to understand what the fiscal impact of all this will be, because if we're going to take on all this additional residential development and then commercial development, what might there be an impact on our fiscal on our revenue and our costs. And so we want to try to understand what that is going forward. So we just have more information to make better decisions.
And
So that's the whole purpose of this particular deliverable.
And this will be, as you say, will be useful to the General Plan Advisory Committee as they do their plan. This will be provided to them as well.
Yes, it will, and it'll help at least give a recommendation. Okay, they may come back and say, we need an additional shopping center in the airport area, just as an example. I'm not sure it will say that, but let's just say it did. And let's say the community is resisting to having more commercial development because it generates traffic or generates other issues. But the purpose of that is to have someone look at what we're trying to create in the airport area. We've already got some housing units there, some additional ones coming online, and we anticipate over the next 8 years additional construction. Well, what are the needs of those future residents in that area? And so, let's get a recommendation so we can start debating it and discussing it. Where should that shopping center go if it is indeed warranted? It's the whole purpose of this study, and I'm kind of focused on the airport areas just as an example.
Right.
But again, it's also West Newport, and it's Newport Center. It's the entire community.
So it seems to me that if this is the way you explain it, that the GPAC's role, at least in some of these areas, is just going to be a negative one. No, we don't like this. Rather than the committee actually coming up, looking at areas and coming up with ideas itself and saying, oh, we should have commercial here or something. Your fiscal analysis will say you should have commercial here, and they'll get say yea or nay. Is that?
So Chair Gardner, let me try to add some. So from a staff standpoint, we're looking to say that, all this housing, as Mr. Campbell's talked about, needs services. What we're thinking too is that we got to capture that sales tax revenue. We don't want it to leak over to Irvine or the other cities. So we want to capture as much of the sales tax revenue. So from a staff standpoint, from a smart planning standpoint, we need to provide retail up in the airport area. We know that. How much retail, we don't know. And that's going to be our recommendation to GPAC. It's up to the GPAC to make a decision whether it's going to be.
We're understanding that. I guess that's my point.
Yes.
Is that the staff can say, we need the revenue, and GPAC can say, we don't care.
Right. And that's your recommendation to the city council, right? And that's how it's going to work.
Right.
Okay.
Just want to be sure we have the process there.
It is all based on the GPAC's recommendation.
Great.
Is there any piece or any evaluation in this of what the costs might be to actually incentivize the developers to meet the RENA numbers? Or is that a completely separate analysis?
So are you in some way to encourage developers to produce affordable housing?
Yeah, exactly, to offset
It's really going to be based on permit processing timeline. It's going to be based on, what do you have any impact fees, development fees, transportation fees. So that's what's going to drive their incentive to develop.
Public comment?
Chair Gardner, Chuck Fancher, Jasmine Creek. A question to Mr. Campbell and then a comment. Jim, was that the study for commercial market determination in the airport, as using your example? Is that a study to be done in conjunction with the completion of the general plan at an extra cost to the city? Or is it part of Kimley Horn? If you could explain to me the background on that.
Sure. One of the components of the existing contract with Kimley Horn is to do this analysis. We want them to do that analysis right now, and so that we can make an informed decision about what, if any, commercial we add to the general plan for all the housing that we're adding. So we want that to be done now. So this actually isn't really, it is a change in scope, but there's already a component of this that's already in the contract, but we're kind of focusing, we want to do it right now with the land use element update.
A comment, if I may, if it would help you or not. In my experience, analysis of market support for commercial development, specifically retail, is basically a look back. They base on historical data to project future outcomes. The retail industry is changing dramatically. Yesterday's news is dead today. If you're going to do residential in the airport area, if that's what the city is going to do over the course of time, if you're going to attempt to concentrate residential development there, which I think is a smart thing to do, I think we got a lot of office building and asphalt that converted into residential villages, and the office world is distracting in reality. But just put a number down of 250,000 square feet to provide for that, and let the marketplace find what it needs out of that. It need not be complicated. If you've got new residential coming in, you will have a demand for retail. Somewhere between 125 to 250,000 square feet, unless you're talking about a lot of people. My thoughts.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Chair Gardner, as I noted in writing, there's a lot of emphasis in everything we hear about the general plan about our focus areas. And I noticed that in task 3.4, the Market and Fiscal Analysis, it mentions in two places the Mariner's Mile as being a focus area. It could be a focus area in our housing element, but I'm not absolutely sure that it is. And so I am suggesting it might be useful if we're trying to engage the public at all in this general plan update, that we post somewhere an actual list of our focus areas and what we're focusing on in each of them. I am not sure I have a clear picture of that. This is mentioning airport area, Mariner's Mile, Dover Westcliff for some things, Newport Center and Mariner's Mile for others, Newport Center and West Newport for still more. I'm not totally sure where that breakdown came from, and I believe we have focus area other ones, but I'm not quite sure what they are. So apparently it's like we have a matrix somewhere of focus areas, and we're looking to do different things in those different areas, but I'm not quite sure what. Some of them to rezone, some of them overlays, some of them new market profiles, so forth. It would help the public to be able to focus on what the focus areas are.
Focus on the focus
Thank you.
areas. All right, and that's something we can work on.
Good afternoon, Chair Gardner and committee members. My name is Nancy Scarborough. I sit on the Finance Committee, and I do know that property tax from residential property and commercial property in our city is about 52% of our budget. It's our income. It's more than sales tax by far, more than double. So new residential will generate more income. That's one thought. A separate but related thought is I think that there needs to be a study of the financial impact of the infrastructure for all of these new homes. And I've asked this question several times and I've never gotten a clear picture, but we are going to need new sewers, new sidewalks, new streets, new signals, all of those things. And so there might need to be some overlap with the finance committee and the budget with these, with this plan.
That is true. Is this that any of this included in the financial analysis? Or are we just looking at the residential and residential support and no infrastructure?
Well, the impacts on infrastructure, if there's any deficiencies in the system, you have to realize that we're primarily going to be recycling existing properties from one land use to the other. And so there may be deficiencies locally in say the sewer system or the water system. Development has to pay their own way in a lot of respects, getting those pipes to fit to the property, but there is an analysis that's ongoing about the overall system. We have some master plans for this. We are examining what the cost of upgrades will be in replacing some of those facilities. It's a separate item that we're working on right now.
Is that part of the capital improvement program?
Components of it are, yes. And it's like, how do we finance those capital improvements over time? And we're looking at development impact fees. And so if it's determined that, every unit needs to pay into a fund so we can make sure we have enough sewers, that list of those improvements will be identified, and then that fee will be charged. And we don't have that study completed as of yet, and we don't obviously have it adopted by the council. But that is an examination that we're doing separately right now as part of our ongoing efforts. And so and the EIR that we're going to be doing as well will help identify and focus our attention on anything that's, from a community-wide perspective, and deficiencies that need to be addressed.
Okay, that'll be the
So all of that is actually, it's in there.
Okay, great.
But it's not
Yes.
really this particular study that we're pointing to on this task.
All right.
Yes, David Tanner. I support bringing on the fiscal consultant and starting this analysis. However, as soon as possible. This is a good idea. However, the consultant needs to have a project description that identifies the parameters, the outside parameters. How many units? Generally, where are they going to be? What are they going to be made up from? Those are not answered now, and they're in my prior comments, and I won't go through those again to you. They're in writing. You have them. So all of these, the RFP that's going to be going on, it needs a project description so that the consultants will know what it is they're bidding on, and generally where in the city it's going to go, and what is given is vague and intentionally ambiguous. It's said so in writing in these documents. So we need to have this. We need to have them right away. And in terms of the process, I'll give you an example that's been around for years of a car that's being designed. And the car is designed without evaluating certain regulatory requirements. And let's say in California, the Air Quality Management District is going to say, gee, the motor in the car has to meet the air quality standards. Well, what's being proposed by staff is let's go ahead and design the car, and then we'll have everybody look at it, and they will say, oh, you have to meet the air quality emissions standards, so we're going to have to put a device on the motor to clean up the motor. Well, in reality, that's a CEQA mitigation measure, which has to be monitored. It's a mitigation measure, a whole list of them has to be monitored, versus having these consultants on board, which I agree, and somehow through the process, have them say to the people that are developing this comprehensive plan, hey, this isn't a good idea right now. We need to adjust it because we're going to have to do this anyway, and we won't then need a mitigation measure, and the plan will look so much better when it is presented to the public. So the way it's going now, and they've told you, we're going to bring these people on after we've done this, and then they're going to look at it. And we don't even have a project description. We won't have a project description by the time this advisory council is on, and they will be changing the project description, which is for an EIR that's already been done. This makes no sense, and you need to help steer the city into a process that is efficient for the taxpayer money and gets us to the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you. But what they're going to be looking at is the numbers in the housing element. Is that not correct?
That is indeed correct. The project description, as we see it, is the goal is to implement the housing element. We have all the units, we know where those sites are, and the reason is if you look at Appendix B to the housing element, there's a long list of properties where we're changing density. And so we've got a pretty good project description based upon the housing element, and so that is the primary change. The part of the change that we don't have at the moment, of course,
Mr.
is
Tanner,
the
that's
results.
Lisa.
Is the results, we want to do that market analysis to help give us some information as to what those future residents may need in terms of goods and services, and where might that be located. It's just an analysis, and obviously we can make our own recommendations to the city council based on what our own knowledge of the community is, but that's the part that we don't have done. But the thought is to get that analysis done so that, we don't, leave commercial behind and not put it into the land use element. And so that's the part that is still vague, because we just don't have an answer for that yet. And that's why we want to get that consultant on board immediately so that we can, start to formulate some recommendations for the consultant to work on and for you folks to consider.
All right, any other comments? No, you already had your one comment on this item, I'm sorry. You can comment on the next one. 3.5, rezoning.
Okay, the rezoning. So the primary goal is obviously to provide, if you boil down what the RENA requires us to do, we've got to provide zoning for all those housing opportunity sites, that Appendix B in the housing element I referenced. And so we've got the changes to the land use element, and we implement changes to the land use element through zoning. And so this is the overlays. This is the task for all the overlays for all of those focus areas that are listed on page 14. And so, it's going to have the densities and intensity of use that would go into those areas through an overlay process. It would have general development standards for the housing types that we would anticipate in those areas. If there's any non-residential that we're incorporating, I would use the underlying zoning if it's allowed for in that zone. But this is the implementing ordinances, if you will, for the policies that we'll also be debating at the same time. So that's what this deliverable is.
All right, well, I look at it, the first couple are recommendations. So the recommendation on how to establish. So does staff approve that? Does the committee approve that as far as the best way to establish the process? Who okays that?
Well, at the end of the day, ultimately, it's the city and the city council, but, we were looking for recommendations from GPAC. Obviously, staff will play a role.
On how to establish it?
Well, establishing a set of regulations, we all know will be done by an ordinance itself, but the housing element policies speak to an overlay process
Right.
or similar zoning strategy, which what that really means is any kind of zoning technique you want in order to achieve the goal to provide the housing. At this point in time, well, when those policies were drafted, we were not certain as to how best to go about implementing the increases in density. Is it an overlay, or is it a specific plan? Is it changes to existing zones that are on the books right now? It's all of the above. And so we want the consultant to assist us to develop the most efficient and best strategy to make that work. I think that it's probably an overlay, because you've got different underlying zones, you've got different general plan densities, designations. For the lion's share of what I think we're going to be doing, it's going to be a simple, straight-up overlay, and in essence, it provides that housing overlay on top of the existing entitlements. And the reason I say that today is that we've been talking about overlays, in that this process wouldn't affect existing entitlements or the ability to continue using a property for commercial purposes under the existing zone. We don't want to jeopardize that at all. I think the most efficient way to do this fairly rapidly, given the schedule we have, is to do an overlay on it. But we want the consultant to examine this and come up with several options, discuss it, make sure we're on the right track. And that's the purpose of that deliverable.
All right, so they as I say, they do an assessment and recommendation, and that goes to the committee. The recommendation. So the committee would first look at the recommendation, and then you say it has to become an ordinance or something. It goes to council. But then they are Kimberly Horn then does the overlays, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Just wanted to clarify that. All right. Questions, comments?
Thank you. I'd like clarification, because I'm not getting it, about what exactly the project is, and specifically for these proposals that are going out, the reamendment to the Kimberly Horn, how many dwelling units are going to be analyzed by the RENA number? Is it the RENA number itself, 4,845? Is it the number the staff has previously talked about in public, it's 9,600, assuming 40% affordable? Is it numbers like Nancy and I have put forward based on the historical affordable housing percentage of projects that puts the number to 20,000? There is a huge difference in analysis, in costs, in public infrastructure, and commercial, and everything based on this number, and the public for years now has wanted a clear answer, and staff has not provided it. So I would like to hear, once and for all, a clear number on what these proposals, since we're sending out an RFP very quickly and amending our existing consultant's contract, how many units are going to be built? Just the total.
So
What's the upper parameter?
That's a reasonable question. What is the number that we are giving the consultants in terms of their fiscal analysis and these overlays and that sort of thing?
Well, it's on page 14. I'm sorry, there isn't a sum there.
Those specific numbers that we.
Those numbers there are the most up-to-date numbers that we have in the housing element for each of those focus areas. Now, obviously, that does exceed the RENA. The total is 8,174, if the math is correct. And so that's the number of units.
Okay, that's the number we're using.
Yeah, that's the number we're using.
All right. We now have a number. Uh-huh.
Chair Gardner, Jim Mosher again. Actually, the bullet point table that Mr. Campbell just pointed us to again is a list of focus areas, and you'll notice that Mariner's Mile is not in that list of focus areas, yet it is mentioned as a focus area elsewhere, which leads me to a more general concern about this that I have. I understand, or perhaps I'm just confused. I thought that we had embarked on a focused, the word comes up too much, focused general plan update just to deal with the housing element. I thought this committee of yours, we were embarking now on a comprehensive general plan update that had been stalled and sidelined, and now we're back on that again. But we're talking here in element, in task 3.5 about revising the land use element. Kimberly Horn, if I understand it, is our exclusive consultant guiding the update of the land use element. Everything I see here is about RENA, it's about housing. But a land use element is that, it's a land use element. Accommodating residences is part of the land use plan. It's not the whole land use plan. We have to accommodate industry, business, all those sorts of things. In a comprehensive update of our general plan, we would be looking at other areas of our city. Corona del Mar, we love it, but it's a little bit aged. Wouldn't that be a focus area for some kind of update, perhaps the land use element? The world changes, as we all know. Sometimes we don't like it changing, but it does. Technology changes, lifestyle, purchasing habits change. I don't see this consultant taking a comprehensive look at our land use element. I see them being told only to accommodate RENA. And so perhaps there's an explanation, but I don't see this as a comprehensive update of our general plan. And I don't see the consultant being asked to do that. Thank you.
So does that mean, as he says, that they would only look at specific areas, but whereas our general plan update is going to look at all areas? But the land use element, will there be, obviously you're going to do some you want to get the land use element rezoning, you have a deadline of what, March 24?
We need to get this to the city council for adoption in late 2023, so that we can set it for the March ballot, March 2024.
So, but the General Plan Advisory Committee will be up and running for a long time, so there will be an opportunity again for them to say, oh, the land use element, we think that there should be more mixed use in Corona Del Mar, say, and what would be the, so they have an opportunity again to look at as many areas in the city as the committee feels it needs to look at.
Absolutely. So again, the scope of work that you see here is really for the Kimley Horn. The project description is to implement the housing element with the housing identified in the housing element, and to do the rezones so that we can meet, the statutory requirements to get all the rezones done within 3 years. And so, yes, this is a focused land use element amendment, if you will. Again, for the housing, some commercial where necessary to support the housing, but, right now the housing element doesn't have housing in Corona Del Mar. That's not where the community wanted to put a lot of housing. That doesn't mean that Corona Del Mar doesn't need some attention. And so I think you're absolutely right. The GPAC can come forward with recommendations to, hey, we need to do additional changes to the land use element to work on Corona Del Mar. Whatever that may be, it'll go through its own separate process.
But our first focus is getting the areas where we're looking at new housing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could even say that this land use element is still a continuation of kind of what RENA has done to our process. And it's not necessarily how I would like to do it, but you're right. This is really just for that, but we will be having an opportunity to talk comprehensively with the general plan.
And I think, to me, that's one role of our little committee, is to sort of be the watchdog and make sure that GPAC is getting its full role and everything, because I know sometimes, staff can get so busy, you get focused on something and say, wait, has this been looked at? So I do think that will be one of our major roles, is to be sure that we have that governor on it. Okay, anything else on this part? 3.6, I think, the noise element?
Certainly, this is a simpler one, and I think this may be also to Mr. Tanner's comments that were submitted today. The housing element does have housing sites that are in the 65 CNEL noise contour, and that is prohibited in the noise element. It's also prohibited in the land use element, and it's prohibited in the zoning code. Specifically, the zoning code implements those policies. And so we did include some sites within that noise contour. So this is simply to, change those policies to allow housing in those areas. Again, probably the 60 to 65. None of the sites are at a higher noise level than that. Again, it's just to make these two elements and the zoning code consistent with the housing element.
And the Airport Land Use Commission, does that factor in here?
It will. Well, first of all, the housing element did go to the Airport Land Use Commission. We did identify all those sites specifically as part of that application process. They did say our plan was inconsistent, and the city council
And we overruled them,
did
as usual.
overrule them. And so we anticipate that we have to go through that process once again. I don't anticipate a different outcome, but we do have to go through that process again.
Comments on the noise deliverables?
The reason that housing is, I think it's conditionally acceptable within our general plan or in other general plans in the 65, 70 CNEL is because people want peace and quiet. CNEL is a weighted 24-hour scale, so it's not a maximum level that happens. It's what happens over a 24-hour period. You need to understand that as a steering committee. And what we're hearing so far, and you'll get a sense of it, and you've gotten a sense of it if you've watched this happen since its inception, is there is staff sway. Staff is saying, we're doing this. They're not going to the community and saying, do you support this? They're saying, we're doing it. Well, staff needs the public support per the city charter. When does this happen? As a steering committee, you need to work with staff who has their mindset on their way. They don't want to go to the state attorney general and get a CEQA opinion. They don't want to do anything. They want to do it their way, and yet there is a requirement that the city charter be implemented, and you can bet the EIR is going to mention the housing element when it goes to the public for a vote. It's not going to not say housing element anywhere, but looking at it the other way, they're saying, oh, well, we're exempting this. Well, the public isn't going to buy that, so you need to help steer this, and it's not going to be an easy task. Thank you.
Yes. Let's be clear on one thing. Staff didn't go to council and say, this is what we're doing, council. Come along with us. There were long discussions, and council gave very firm direction. And it was council that pulled the plug on the previous outreach, because when we got the RENA numbers, it was such a shock to the systems that we've got to just all hands on board for this. So this isn't staff running amok. This is staff trying to follow, to its best of its ability, council orders. Now, we can disagree with whether the council did the right things and all that sort of thing, but that's happens to be the case. It was council directions, just do this. So that doesn't mean we can't improve. Anything else, Jim?
Task point 3.6 is noise element update. Noise is an issue very dear to me, since I live both by a high-traffic road and I'm impacted by the airport. And so if we want this GPAC doing a comprehensive update of the general plan to be thinking about noise in general and not be totally boxed in to be looking only at trying to accommodate RENA, I think it's important to realize that there is a large swath of our city that is impacted and concerned about noise from the airport. And if we want to be really creative, this may seem like a little out of left field idea. I would point out there are other cities that actually have, like we have a harbor and bay element, there are other cities that have an airport element. I believe Santa Ana has one, and the GPAC might consider whether Newport Beach needs one as well. Thank you.
I, again, do not think that these two deliverables are the end of the noise element, that there will be opportunities for a GPAC to talk about noise in a variety of ways.
Absolutely. The noise element has a lot of mitigation requirement policies in there that are carried forward in all of what we do. We're going to examine those to see if they could be strengthened. You know, we do want to protect those future residents as best we can, recognizing that maybe some of the outdoor spaces aren't quite going to be as.
But these particular elements, these particular items in the noise element are related to the housing element, land use, that sort of thing. They're very
Exactly.
specifically tailored. Again, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be able to look at this element
You're right.
freshly by
Absolutely
the
right.
committee. Anything else on noise? All right, 3.7, the general plan build-out analysis.
Yeah, this is a very specific item, you know, all the housing units and then any non-residential that we put in there, we need to have a very detailed analysis of what all that is, because at the end of the day, we have to go to a vote of the electorate pursuant to Charter Section 423. So all of this has to be cobbled up and understood where all the units are going, where the non-residential is going, and what statistical areas. And so this is all part of understanding that net increase that we would be asking the community through a ballot.
And again, that will be
Support.
with input from GPAC.
Absolutely.
Kimberly, anything? No? Comment?
Hi, David Tanner. Where are the public workshops in this process, in this timeline, in this frame, where public input can be given to the city council, to the planning commission, to the whole city, but where? Because the workshops are supposed to reflect the view, they're intended to reflect the view of the public, and why should we be spending a lot of taxpayer money to evaluate things that the taxpayers are not going to be supporting? And this is the process that staff is elaborating today. Maybe they're guided by the city council, but where is the public workshop? The material that you're evaluating tonight says here, the public, like the advisory committee, will look at it after the fact, after we've done it. Well, that's a waste of taxpayer money if the public doesn't buy it. So as a steering committee, you need to talk to the city council and say, look, we need to start the workshops right away, and they need to focus on areas that the public is concerned about, and we need their input now because we need their approval, or this whole thing is a waste of taxpayer money time. Thank you.
We will get into a lot of that in the second part, or part D. Anything else?
Yeah, in connection with the references that we've heard from Mr. Tanner and from the staff about the schedule being driven by the need for a public vote, I have to say I am a great admirer of Charter Section 423, our green light provision. I believe it's a very good one, but I'm looking at it here, and the very last line of it says, and I think the steering committee needs to be aware of this, this section, section 423, shall not apply if state or federal law precludes a vote of the voters on the amendment that is being proposed. I have not heard any very clear discussion of what that sentence means and how that impacts this process. I find it conceivable that if state law actually requires us to add a minimum number of houses, that possibly a vote is not required on that, but it would be required if we go beyond what the state is imposing on us. So I think that's something the committee should at least be aware of, and it bothers me a little that the staff has not told you that. Thank you.
That's interesting.
So Mr. Mosier brings up a good point with regards to our Charter 423. I think what we from a staff standpoint, we go back to what our council's directed us to do and what we've communicated to the city council. We've always communicated to the city council that we will do the Charter 423 vote after we get once we do the land use element. We did have an earlier conversation with the city council with that provision that Mr. Mosier did bring up. The council was not accepting of not following our charter. The council was adamant we must follow our charter. We're going to go to a vote. That discussion was early on when we had early conversations with the council, when we start kind of having that housing element discussions with them. At this point, our marching order is that we're just going to focus on having a vote.
All right. But I think that's something that will be discussed in the ensuing period, probably.
That's true.
So that's a good point. Thank you. Anything else? All right, the general plan build-out analysis.
Yeah, I think we just discussed that.
Did we just do
one.
that? I'm
So,
sorry.
Yeah, the next task is just the maps
mapping.
that go with it. Obviously, we want to present this in a mapping form. We want the consultant to do that and to do all the tabular analysis for your section for task 3.7. You know, it's readily done in GIS. Want to make sure that's included, so it helps visualize the item for the community. So pretty straightforward.
Right. Anything on this? Okay, and then 3.9 is the EIR.
Yeah, so there is a task there. It's very detailed, you know, to do an EIR for the project description. And what we're basically saying is this is the new project description, this land use element update, the rezones, the noise element update, all the package that you've seen described here. That would be the project description for the EIR going forward. And we want them to complete that. So we have the basis of that information before we go to the city council to approve it and then set it to a vote of the electorate.
Okay.
Specific to the housing element.
Specific to incorporating the housing units, yes. Any other changes that come out as a result of the process, any other modifications and changes, you know, one of them we talked about is, you know, additional non-residential or commercial development in strategic areas to help, you know, support the community.
And any other changes?
And yes, any other changes that might come out as a result of the process. You know, obviously we need to get that kind of pinned down as quickly as we can so that we have a stable project description to do an EIR, do the traffic analysis that everyone expects us to do. We're going to do that. That's all part of this EIR. There is a detailed traffic modeling that would be done as well, and that will help us, you know, make those decisions.
All right. Any final comments?
Yeah, this one I find really confusing because the contract that we're revising already has a task 9 to do an EIR among many other tasks. I thought because the EIR was being folded into this, it meant the other tasks were going away, but we've told they're not. So they now have two different tasks, 3.9 and task 9, both at the same time, both telling them to do, I think, the same thing. Or is this task 3.9 somehow different than the task 9? Why do we have a redundant requirement in two different places telling them to do an EIR, which seems to be what this is recommending? Is this any different than the task 9 that they are already been, and supposedly they're working on? I don't know what their progress is on that. I don't even think we've had a scoping meeting yet, but supposedly they're busily at work on it. Thank you.
Is that just a typo, any type of thing?
No, this particular item for this document is there just so that everyone reading this document understands we're going to do an EIR. We want to make sure that was plainly clear. That there isn't going to be a redundant component in the contract. Again, we formatted it this way for just to be full disclosure. So the EIR is going to be, again, the project description is the one that we've been discussing this evening, and so we want to make sure it's very clear in the amendment that, you know, the EIR isn't on the full and complete EIR general plan update process. It's really this kind of more focused land use element zoning, and then the additional commercial, and then any other changes that the community wants us to make. If we can fit it into this process, we'll do our best. But again, it's to focus the EIR's attention to this kind of revised scope.
Yes?
Yes, David Tanner. I agree that the CEQA consultant should be doing everything they can at this time and should have been assisting. Until they have a project description, they really can't do the impact assessment. They can do the existing conditions and have that part of the EIR pretty much done. It isn't going to change much with any of the input that's going to come in, but until they have a defined project description. I've heard tonight that the project is going to be 8,000 some odd units. That's going to be the general plan update. So I would ask, what happens if that number is exceeded for any reason? Density bonus, whatever. Is the general plan update invalidated? Is a new CEQA document required before you can move forward? What happens? Because this is in my opinion, an extremely low number, which is going to give you an environmental impact report that's going to look rosier, not as rosy as 4,800, the RENA number, and 35 units, but by being low, it's going to look to the public like, oh, it isn't going to have that many impacts. They won't be that significant. A more realistic number, a higher number, is going to paint a different picture, and it's going to have significantly higher mitigation measures. And the other thing I just heard was that the housing element, or the land use element, is going to include the housing element. I just heard that. Maybe I heard it wrong. I think you would have heard it too. If that's the case, why is the housing element, how can it be exempt? Which is what they've told you previously, and what they've started when they started this whole thing, saying we don't need to go to the public. That's what the first 2019 plan was. A housing element alone, no land use element, no CEQA, it's exempt. That was shot down by HCD. And you can read the statement. Don't believe me. Read the written statement from HCD in their comment letter to the city. Read all of the comment letters from HCD to the city. So I would urge the steering committee not to recommend to the city council that they recommend to staff to study a much higher number. And if we don't get that, that's fine, but it's better than being too low and then all of a sudden saying, oh, we're stopped dead in the water. So consider that, please.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, moving on.
Next agenda item.
All right, this is the next agenda item, correct, Chair? All right, so it's at your pleasure how you'd like to go through this one, but I can provide a brief overview as to our thoughts.
All right.
Okay, so, again, just reiterate that this is a very rough draft. We did not include the boilerplate language that the city's finance department would require, just because we don't want to bore you, and also we can't really change it, so it's not worth talking about. There are more substantive draft sections in here for you to look at, including an objective and background, which talks a little bit about the story of how we did start this in 2019 and largely got derailed or diverted due to housing and the large requirement, which we.
And Benny, if you can just talk about what's the purpose of doing this RFP?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So kind of as we've talked about with the two different tracks that you see on the screen, the general plan update, this is really the remainder of the updates. You'll see in here we do talk about outreach and providing more robust outreach program. And I think too, it was mentioned in the Kimley Horn scope to try to dovetail the two at some point if possible, maybe leverage the outreach from this consultant and have the consultants work together, kind of in a similar fashion like we did before, because Kearns and West, our previous outreach consultant, was on board when Kimley Horn came on board, and we were able to use a lot of the outreach services we had with them to inform that housing element update. So the intent here, again, is to really have a more robust outreach process that involves the GPAC and the GPUSC very heavily and solicits input. So one thing I would state, and I made a very specific statement here, and I'll try to find it if I can, but it's basically saying that it lacks specificity on purpose because we don't know what the directed changes to the policies will be from the General Plan Advisory Committee and the community, because we haven't had that outreach yet.
So just a question, we had quite a bit of work done. We had a number of meetings. We had the one we had here, which was great, got a great turnout, and a lot of various districts. That's all going to be provided. We've got that, and they will be able to have access to that as just a starting point for themselves.
Yes, and that's all cataloged too, just to talk about the Newport Together website. We did put that in here, and I'll state, I know that Mr. Mosier mentioned this in his comments, but I did get the credentials to start updating that finally, so I put it under construction there, just trying to buy myself some time, so I apologize. But I did try to clean it up and provide some more informative information, so we'll look to have the consultant make that more meaningful with interactive activities should we go that route as part of this RFP.
Okay. How much of a presentation do you have? That's it?
I can elaborate on whatever you'd like, I guess. It's at your pleasure.
One of the things I was looking at in the project research and data collection, you said number 2, must partner with the city's harbor commission to refresh goals and policies. So, and you have that must with a couple of the other city commissions. How do you picture that working with the General Plan Advisory Committee? I mean, we haven't decided yet who's going to be on, what the overall composition will be, but is there conflict there potentially?
And I don't know if the words were so intentional that they can't be changed. It's more, consider a partnership with the harbor.
You had consider partnering with local historical societies. So I would say at least until we figure out what the composition of GPAC is and just what specifics, whether we could ask for a representative from, say, each commission or something, or we could just have somebody who's generally in art or something, but that's next. So I would suggest softening those, so it's not, they have to, but.
Noted, thank you.
And because that may be a recommendation of GPAC anyway. Oh, what does the Harbor Commission think, and that sort of thing. And then the other thing is, in all this, you listed the elements we have. Will there be room for a new element if, for some reason, lots of people want, say, a sustainability element? But will there be a chance to incorporate or environmental justice? I mean, I know we have to have that now. Is that a separate element nowadays?
We've staff and with council direction has been looking at environmental justice policies, which is another option to include environmental justice policies in the applicable elements, correct?
Other areas, but there would be room if GPAC did decide we needed something, then that could be added.
Yes, absolutely.
That's not excluded, okay. think. Now, those were my main, because I see that you have a kickoff meeting with you guys, which is fine. But then we're going to have will they present a plan to us that we'll have a chance to review in terms of the deliverables, a comprehensive community outreach and engagement plan? So we'll be able to say, oh, we need 2 more workshops, or we think you need to do this and that. Would that come to the?
Yeah, staff would look to the steering committee and the advisory committee as applicable for all these
Okay,
deliverables.
all right. Yeah, those are my main, Kimberly?
Yeah, no, my main concern is just making sure that in this particular scope, that we have the benefit of a little bit more time. I know not a ton, but making sure that we do get input first before we put forth our preconceived ideas of what policy changes we want to make.
And I think that when they present the plan, I know you had a lot of ideas in terms of the social media and that sort of thing, and to be somewhat specific when they have a plan to present, not just we're going to do outreach, but we're going to do this kind of outreach, we're going to use this media and that sort of thing, so we can really, everybody can add things that they think might be necessary.
Agreed.
Okay, public comment.
We have to make sure we change this.
Chair Gardner, Member Carter,
On the outreach, we gotta make sure we change
I'm
this.
seeking some education. And I'll use the circulation plan as an example. So it was circulated, the update element was circulated on July 12, and in the memo that accompanied the update, and I think is referenced tonight, there's going to be, it will go before the Planning Commission on September 8 and in front of City Council on September 27th, though I think that's moved to October. What will happen in those sessions? Is it going to be adopted by those bodies, or is it simply a review by those bodies? And then when the GPAC happens and whatever process is too late of 2024, there'll be other community interface and opportunities to speak to elements of the circulation plan. Could be true for any other element, so that there could be some potential for further evolution of these drafts that are now circulating. So is the next 2 meetings, are they simply a review, or do they lock it in? And does the ability for public input and change occur up until 2024?
That's a good question, and I think, I don't think that we want to close the debate and discussion about any of the elements that we've looked at. I think that what I'm hearing from the committee is that, we want to make sure that those abilities are there. Because, we have done a significant effort on the circulation element. The one thing that isn't changing is the master plan highways. It's staying the same. Once we do the EIR, we might find deficiencies that we might need to examine. And so, yeah, the circulation element might come back for maybe a modification of the master plan. Maybe not. There may be some policy choices there for the community to make. Room for enhancement, absolutely. And I think there is room for that in the broader update. We touched base on how this land use element update is really kind of focusing on implementing the housing element and some commercial to go with it. As we go through the evolution of the overall process, we might come back and revisit some policies to say, we really want to do X, Y, and Z. Then we can work with the community and then put that in its proper location. And it may go back into the land use element as a subsequent amendment as we comprehensively look at it. So I don't want to close the door to discussion and feedback and input on any of the elements.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Hi, David Tanner. Just like to add a little more input. Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council. City Council cannot act without first acting on the CEQA document for the project. So if there's changes after this, that then subjects the CEQA document to amendment and revision, recirculation, public comment, this whole process. This is why I'm spending so much time tonight on the process. We need to try and minimize that as much as we can not only is it taxpayer money that's being spent on this longer process, but we have an objective to meet, we have timelines to meet, and we need to be spot on with these documents, which is why we need the public input up front rather than at the end, because if it comes at the end, after the AIR is done and certified for these elements, which have no effect until the public approves them, that's the charter amendment, we're just spinning our wheels. So I would ask you, find out as a steering committee what the predicament is that the city is in right now. That means you need to know all the dirt, everything that's going on. So you can effectively talk to the city council and say, look, we've got this problem here. You need to be like a project manager and say, how are we going to deal with this problem? Because it looks unclear, and we've got the public who we have to deal with. It's unique to us in this particular case. We've got HCD on the other hand. They're not caving. So we've got some real unique and challenging problems that we've never faced. Cities in Southern California and California have never faced this. So there's this standoff, like I was telling you, going on right now. And what happens if we don't meet the deadline? Is the world going to end?
We'll find out.
Well, let me tell you, I just got a legal synopsis of a state Supreme Court case from a law firm this morning talking about a dam in Northern California that its permit to operate expired 15, 20 years ago. Guess what? The dam is still there. It's still operating. There have been hearings and hearings and hearings and studies and money wasted, and it's still operating, and they've gotten nowhere, and the California Supreme Court ruled on it, which basically said, oh, well, you've got to start over, and not only as federal rules apply, but state CEQA applies, blah, blah, blah. The world isn't going to come to an end. It may be the best strategy for the city to assume, like so many other cities, that we're not going to meet the deadlines.
Well, that's a council decision.
That's a council. Well, you're a steering committee, so you need to steer based on your opinion as to what is best for the city, given the circumstances. You need to make these recommendations, so you need to understand the predicament that the city is in and make good recommendations based on that. Thank you.
Thank you. The point about the EIR, is that closing off options?
Well, what I would say is that we have to, at some point fairly soon, decide what that project description is. And as I indicated earlier, the piece that's sort of in flux is, what, if any, commercial or non-residential we might want to add in certain areas, as it relates to the housing. And that, I think, needs further study and discussion. But we do have, the housing part of it is pretty well locked in based upon the housing element goals and the very specific allocations that were made. There may be some minor adjustments in there, but I think that's pretty well locked in. We need to do it fairly quickly so that we can finish the EIR, so we can, get the amendment to the council, certify that EIR, and get it before the voters in March of 2023. And so,
Which isn't very far away.
it is not very far away. It is, we do need to move urgently, and I know Mr. Tanner, as a practicing planner for over 30 years, we're taught to seek community input. In this particular case, it's a little unusual. We've got the state basically putting a mandate on us, and so, and given the timelines that we have, we really can't do a wonderful bottom-up kind of planning effort that we would want to do. Now, we will be doing that for the broader comprehensive update, and we'll come back in and make some modifications and tweaks as we go. But I think this initial phase here, what the EIR is going to focus on, is really, that housing element implementation and the commercial necessary for it.
As I say, we knew as soon as we had to deal with RENA that we were going to be not doing the perfect all elements are equal, and that's just a given. But we will do our best. Anything else on, yes, Charles?
Thank you. Just a redirect to Mr. Campbell, if I may. Specifically, what will happen at the Planning Commission meeting? What action will they take on the circulation element? Same question for City Council.
Certainly, at the Planning Commission level, they would be reviewing the document. We hope that they would be making a recommendation to the city council for approval. And then we would go to the city council and we would have a public hearing there, take any public comments. And we hope that the council would then ultimately adopt the document either that night or at a subsequent meeting.
And if you'll educate me on the background, and again, this is under education, were there community meetings where the circulation plan was discussed with different elements of the community, or is it largely a product of staff, consultant, and the leadership of the city council?
I think it was all of the above.
We had 15 workshops for the circulation of it.
15 workshops throughout the community.
Yes, we did.
I
And all
missed
those
them.
workshops
I
are
missed them. I
recorded
was
and available online. So you can go back and revisit those tapes and see what was discussed. It's a fairly robust debate.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? No? Did you miss public comment? Yes. All right, go ahead.
Good evening, Chair Gardner, Member Carter, and staff. My name is Charles Klob. Like many commenters here tonight, I'm continue to be frustrated by the housing element wagging the dog of the general plan update, and the frustration is obvious, and not much perhaps you can do about it, and we're sorry for that, but it continues. Regarding public participation, many of us are on the email list, and we received access to the agenda tonight. But as recently as 5 o'clock tonight, if one was to go to the city's general website, the landing page where one looks at the calendar and click on this meeting, there is no link to the agenda there. And the participation is thin, but if we're not already on the mailing list, we would have had no idea. Thank you.
Thank you. You'll follow up with that?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Moving on then to our final item, which is the advisory committee. And you provided a nice thing from our last time around.
Yes, so I put that on a slide for you. I thought it might be useful. I know it's extremely large text and easy to read, so apologize for that. But this is a straight excerpt from the prior GPAC formation in 2001 when the resolution went forward. This is not by any means any recommendation we're making, but it's more for your information because you asked for it last meeting. So hopefully this helps inform your recommendation this evening.
Well, as I said at the last meeting, I really do feel a sufficiently large, sufficiently diverse committee is in many ways a time saver, because we worked out so many of the issues within the committee itself because we had the two different sides, moving together. Maybe that's because it was all those years ago. Maybe we don't do that anymore. I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully, we do better than at the national level on this sort of thing. So I would recommend again at least 30 committee members. Can we?
Absolutely.
And we're gonna discuss sort of general, and then we'll just open it up and go back and forth, because I think this is really a critical part, and I want as much input on this as possible. I'm torn between having specific groups, like this had, 3 from Spawn,
Right.
those specific groups, or a specific commission that matches with a specific element. We have an arts element, we have an arts commission, we have a recreation element, we have that sort of thing. That's sort of an easy way of doing it. Hey, arts commission, you pick someone and they become a member. And it works all right if we have a large number of sort of general where we fill in.
Correct.
Thoughts on that?
I definitely think we need representation from the other commissions. I mean, because otherwise you've got two, right hand might not know what the left hand's doing, and I think that there should be some consistency there, right?
Okay, thoughts on that in terms of like representatives from the various commissions or committees or that sort of thing, particularly the commissions because they're in the charter.
Yes, David Tanner, I would support having one overall committee rather than subcommittees, or if you have subcommittees report to the overall committee.
Oh, yeah, no, that wasn't what I was talking about.
Oh,
So I'm just saying, if we have, somebody from the Arts Commission would be a GPAC member, and they would be sort of the art experts, say, when we discuss that element. It didn't mean there couldn't be other arty people on it, but that was.
no, I agree with what you're saying. I think that would be great. we want experts in the various fields if we can get them, and that would include, in addition to this table here, government experts. Maybe we want to try and get someone from SCAG that can represent SCAG's view. They have a whole different view. Maybe we want, since we have to go to the Airport Land Use Commission, maybe we want to get a representative from the Airport Land Use Commission to sit on this. They'll be looking at policies and goals that might give us some insight. They
That's
would have
interesting.
that. So I would look for government and add another line across for government representatives in some way. And that could also include other cities that have gotten housing element approvals.
Right.
There aren't
I would
many.
say,
Advisory.
I would say myself that I would keep the committee to people who live in Newport Beach because it's their general plan. The last time around, what we did though, is we had people like that come at various meetings. We had presentations and when we needed particularly an expertise beyond what maybe staff felt comfortable providing. So we can incorporate that, but I would limit it to Newport Beach residents because that's.
Yeah,
who
I
it's
think
going
if
to
they're
impact.
incorporated, however, it doesn't matter, but having these people, having other consultants where you can talk to them and say, if they've gotten the housing element approved, how did you do it? It would be nice for these people to know what HCD fought on and how they were able to negotiate around some of these things. So I think the more diverse, the better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe those people could be advisory.
Yeah, or something like that. That's advisory. Anything else in terms of having actual commissioners on the committee?
Chair Gardner, I think that's a very good idea. I would suggest, though, when the GPAC committee is, at some point, I think the interaction with those boards and commissions should be a little more extensive than that. And perhaps when the GPAC committee, with that one representative on it who keeps them informed of what's going on, is close to making a recommendation, that board or commission as a whole be given an opportunity to review and comment on it so that there be some interaction back to the GPAC from what not just the one representative, but what the whole Harbor Commission or Parks, Beach and Recreation Commission or other
You don't
thinks
have
about
a
that.
maverick just representing.
Yes.
Right.
And then a more general comment I wanted to make is that we're seeing something here from the past. Newport Beach has a very wonderful resource for archiving and making available to the public documents from the past. It's a system we call Laserfiche. I think you were on the council when we approved that. And I believe that the city staff somewhere has the complete records, agendas, minutes, and so forth of that old GPAC and the old steering committee, what they did. On Laserfiche, there is a section of boards and committees that includes some old and now defunct boards and committees, such as the Media and Communication Committee, if you remember that, and documents from it. I don't think it would be very difficult for the staff to transfer those files so that they're visible on Laserfiche. And then the two committee members who were not involved in that process back then can actually review how it worked with the structure that was used then. And the public also can see how that old process worked. And I think that would be a probably not very difficult and useful thing, because I think the documents are somewhere. They're just not linked to from Laserfiche currently, even though we have many old boards and committees documents on it. So, thank you.
Any other thoughts about representatives from commissions?
Yes, Chair Gardner, Chuck Fancher. I realize this is perhaps an older document, but I would recommend we include the city's water quality and coastal tidelands committee, some representation from that committee to be involved in the steering committee, and not knowing the details of the housing element, but understanding that its solution, the implementation of it does require affordable housing to be a component therein. That there are some affordable housing entities like Jamboree and Mercy and others, and Vanith that are in Newport, that have operations in Newport Beach that could maybe lend a voice to this topic.
Okay, so I think we'll do that. That
Yep,
sounds good. I
absolutely.
think we got agreement on this. This doesn't quite represent the whole community, but these are the people that came out and caring. So that would be, let me get, So somebody from the Harbor Commission and the Parks, Beaches, and Recreation Commission and the Arts Commission. Pardon? And water quality would be fine. Then we have the
Safety.
historical resources element. I'm sorry, what?
Oh, safety. Who would we want for safety? No?
We'll do something for that different, I think, because we wouldn't have like a police officer or something.
Yeah, I know.
For the historical resources element, God, that's gonna be tough. We have 3 historical societies, and they don't seem to talk to each other. But it would probably be wise to have a representative from one of the historical societies, because they will be very much up to date on that. Any thoughts about that? Any problems with that? Great, okay. Then, I like the idea of having at least a couple of specific environmental representatives and specific business representatives. And I guess we would send invitations to submit names from groups like SPAWN. I don't know, I guess there are some locals, Harbor, Beaches, and Parks, and SPAWN in particular is obviously local, but some of the groups, they all have local members or something. So
Sierra Club and Surfrider have a bunch of them, yeah.
Yeah, they have that. John?
Nancy, Surfriders been very active on the water quality.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, but what kind of number do you think? 3 and 3, or like they had before? Or is that too many, too few?
I think 3 is a good number.
Okay. And then the chamber and all these various business groups, and we might want to talk to like Steve Rosansky, see if he has any ideas as far as, or maybe Gary Sherman as well, in terms of groups and that sort of thing. Then the issue areas, I agree. I mean, in terms of Santa Ana Heights particularly, I mean, that has its own unique issues. Newport Coast, it's important to me because it's just, I still don't feel like it feels fully incorporated at times. And so I think it's really important to have a representative from there. The Bayonne Harbor, well, we're going to cover that basically with the Harbor Commission, and there'll be other people. I mean, we're going to have a larger group that will represent different things. The airport area, that's probably, and would that be do you think a business person?
Is there
A business representative, a resident living up there?
are there many residential?
Well, we have a very limited number of residential. We just have the one project so far. There'll be more coming. I don't know if I don't know how that would actually be represented. There's obviously a much more significant business environment up
Okay.
there.
That's what we had last time.
Maybe one of the
Yeah,
larger
John-
employers might
John
want to step
Saunders
forward.
last time was
John Saunders, yeah, that's a name
so-
from the past.
Okay. Mariners Mile, I think that's an important one, obviously. Lots of issues there.
CDM isn't on here.
Huh?
CDM.
I think we'll get that anyway, probably. Lido Marina Village, is that still, I don't think as much as.
I don't think
I
he's
think
specific.
they've gone through the renovation process, and so they're
It doesn't
kind of
have to be
maintaining the
specific.
property, so
Yeah.
I
may
mean,
not
when
be.
we look at the general group, then we can be looking at, in terms of, thing. But what about, I was thinking, do we want someone from Oasis, or maybe from their board, to represent the senior group, because the seniors are a very important part of it. Pardon?
I think there's a lot of CDM members.
Yeah. And so I would say someone from Friends of Oasis.
Okay.
You may want somebody from Balboa Village.
Pardon what?
Maybe somebody from Balboa Village, down on the peninsula.
Oh, yeah.
And it says, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, we should definitely make sure we cover each district, right?
Yeah, and that will be in the general thing. We can, as we look at the names coming in, we can make sure that we don't have, 22 from Corona del Mar. We should have, now, but when we're talking about geographical things, would you want to have, again, a specific, do we want someone from Peninsula Point Association? Do we want someone from the West Newport Community Association? Thoughts on that? Because there are a couple of those areas where, I mean, they do have active groups, and the Peninsula's points issues are a bit different than West Newport's issues, actually, in many ways.
I think any homeowners association or community association is great because they're able to aggregate feedback from their people.
Thoughts on that, Nancy?
I think you could reach out to all of those. I'm not sure you're gonna get responses from each of those areas.
Okay.
I mean, and if you added them all up together, you're gonna have 50 people on the committee by the time, you know, I mean, if you had one from every.
Well, I was thinking, like, you have the Connemara Residents Association. I was thinking more of the village associations, because they don't have actual homeowners associations. They're just volunteer groups, so they are more active in some ways probably than the other associations. Charles?
The executive director of the Banning Ranch Conservancy.
She doesn't live in Connemara? Yeah. That might be a good idea, a Banning Ranch representative. Sharon, no, Sharon. Suzanne Forster, I was thinking, yeah, so, okay, Banning Ranch, yeah, they both live, because that's an area that's gonna be developing. Do we want someone from, just a second, from the school districts specifically, or just some, parents? I mean, I think the school district might be important.
It depends if they don't live in the community.
It's terribly important because the airport area where we're wanting to concentrate housing is the Santa Ana Unified School District. And when people move there and discover that they can't go to important schools, that's something to address in this general plan with involvement from the school district.
I think that, as you say, some of them for Costa Mesa, but in all of these things, we're making an invitation. Obviously, they can just say, no, nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to spend 2 years going to monthly meetings, which we have to be very clear about.
Okay.
Also, so let the people know what they're getting into. Jim?
I should have made this comment earlier. When I reviewed the minutes from the last meeting, I tried to look at the video, and the audio,
Yeah.
even the people speaking here, is extremely poor. You can
Yes,
barely hear it.
I noticed that.
And so the people speaking here,
Oh, yeah, that's.
if they want to be
sorry.
part of the record, they have to come up here, otherwise nobody is going to have any idea what they said. As to what you're speaking about right now, I think it's impacted by this uncertainty of whether the GPAC is boxed in just talking about RENA, or it's a GPAC looking at a more comprehensive general plan update.
Yes, the latter.
I've heard both, so I'm not quite sure. And if they're going to be spending a year making recommendations to you about the land use element only to implement RENA, I would think it should be top-heavy with people who are from the areas that are going to be most impacted from that. And perhaps then it could then transition to a broader community, including people from Peninsula Point is probably not too relevant since we're not planning to put any RENA housing there, but later on it might be quite relevant. So you might consider a phased GPAC that is, if I understand what the staff is saying, will be focused for a year or so just on RENA and then be moving into something broader. So that's what I'm very easily confused, but that's my thought.
So we're envisioning one GPAC that's going to work on the land use element and the general plan update. So it is, for the land use portion, it is going to be it's going to be fast paced. We are on a strict timeline. The remainder of the general plan is we have as much time as we'd like to take to resolve or identify some of the policies and what we want. So it is one GPAC to work on both.
Okay. All right, we've got a general thing. Any areas, specifics that we're missing? Dave?
One hopefully last comment for you, and that is, I think the members, while it's good to have a diversity of city representatives from the areas that will be impacted, I think we also need to look at the task that they're going to be asked to do and try and get people that have expertise. My understanding, they're going to be looking at goals and policies and commenting on the goals and policies. We need to have people that understand the ramifications of that so they can ask meaningful questions and make good recommendations rather than a general homeowner that represents an association in a very important place. So getting people on the committee with the qualifications that we need, I think, is imperative. So that's why I'm recommending, and I agree with Jim about school districts, water districts, infrastructure people, outside of staff that can give independent views and analysis. So I think that's an important consideration for forming this committee. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know that I agree. I don't mean that we shouldn't have people that have some expertise, but I really see this as having a variety of backgrounds, including a lack of experience in that sort of thing. It's just somebody who lives here and is concerned about it and wants to see their kids live here at some point, or they're young and they want to be able to live here, and this is the way they envision the city. So I see at least a mix of those. I don't want to have just nothing but expertise. I think we'd lose something by that. That is my opinion.
I agree with you.
All right, what do you want to do? in terms
So,
of-
so you gave us a lot of feedback. So there's a couple options, I think. Would you like us to run with this, draft the reso, get it to council, or would you rather have us come back to you? And that's the first question, and for you to review the reso and the matrix.
Well, yeah, I would like to see it before it
Okay.
goes, just make sure we captured everything.
So I would like to do it expeditiously.
Yeah.
So if we can come back in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yep.
And maybe just one item on the
One
agenda.
item real quick,
And we
just
just
because
meet.
to get the public in and,
Correct.
yeah,
Okay, we'll do that. We'll come back in 2 weeks.
all right.
And Ben will work on either this room or the council chambers, either Monday or Wednesday.
Okay.
And if I can ask the committee members, are you available Monday, the 22nd, or Wednesday, the 24th?
Either for me.
Yeah, either's good for me too.
Okay, so we'll work on our end, and then we'll push emails out.
Great. All right. Is there anything else? Susan?
I think that's it for the agenda.
Committee announcements. Do you have an announcement, Kimberly?
Not that I'm aware of, other than we're having a meeting in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for all of your contributions. Thank you, Mr. Tanner. We will be considering many of the things you said, as for the rest of you as well. I think that there was some clarification tonight, and I think that's always helpful. And I'm looking forward to meeting in 2 weeks and clarifying the makeup of the General Plan Advisory Committee. And then you can go, does that have to go to council?
Yes.
Okay, as far as just the
So
general.
after we're done here, then we'll take it to the city
Then we'll
council.
send the announcements out and.
Correct.
Okay.
And then how do you pick the actual people?
So we can do it a couple ways. If this committee would like to do the selection process, to review the resumes and the applications, and I think that'd probably be the best way, and you make recommendations to the city
Now,
council.
does that, when we do it on council, we have a little subcommittee that does it and says, oh, yeah, you're in private, you go, well, that guy's a jerk, we don't want him.
Right.
Which you don't do when you're doing, so
No.
does that also have to be, that part of it have to be a public meeting, or just the,
No, just the final appointees that they'll ratify.
okay. 'Cause
Yes.
I just think that'll go much faster if we can just look and then present it and everybody go, no, you need
Right.
some changes. Okay, great. All right, and we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
you.